She showed kindness and got fired, but the next day, she walked in as the boss. Emily Carter never sought trouble, it always seemed to find her. She wasn't one to make a fuss, start an argument, or demand attention. No, Emily believed in hard work, kindness, and staying in her lane, just like her grandmother had taught her. Do your job, treat people with respect, and never, ever rock the boat unless absolutely necessary. But sometimes doing the right thing comes at a cost, and Emily was about to pay the price. For nearly 3 years, Willow Creek Diner had been more than just a job, it was her second home. A small-town eatery just outside Austin, Texas, tucked between a worn-down gas station and an old-school barber shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it had heart. The kind of place where truckers grabbed a hot meal before sunrise, retirees sipped coffee as they read the morning paper, and the waitstaff knew your usual order before they even knew your name. Emily thought she had everything figured out. But in a single moment, one act of kindness would change everything and turn her world upside down. It was the kind of job that was easy to take for granted. The hours were long, the pay barely covered the essentials, and management only cared about the bottom line. But Emily stuck with it. She had responsibilities. Her rent was already too high for a cramped one-bedroom, and her younger brother, Ryan, was in his second year at Texas State University. He had no idea she was the reason his fridge was never empty, and his textbooks always showed up on time. She never told him, just sent a little extra whenever their mom couldn't make ends meet. That was why she took the back-to-back shifts, why she smiled at customers who barely acknowledged her, and why she tolerated co-workers who treated kindness like a weakness. She had seen things here that made her stomach turn the way Lisa, a senior waitress, would shower attention on businessmen in pressed suits while acting like the construction workers at Table 7 didn't even exist. How Kyle, a newer server, conveniently forgot to take orders from certain tables. How the entire mood of the diner shifted depending on who walked through the doors. It wasn't just about money. A well-dressed man in a Rolex got warm conversation and top-tier service. A guy in work boots with paint-stained jeans, barely a glance. And if someone looked like they might not tip well, some of the staff wouldn't even bother trying. Emily hated it, but speaking up wasn't an option. She had learned that the hard way. A few months back, she had made an offhand comment about how a table had been waiting too long while Lisa stood at the register, scrolling through her phone. Lisa had looked her straight in the eye and said, "You don't get paid extra for being a saint, Emily. That was the way things worked. You either played along or you learned to keep your mouth shut." Emily had chosen the latter, until that night, and after that night, nothing would ever be the same again. The dinner rush had come and gone. It was a slow Wednesday evening, the kind Emily didn't mind. Fewer customers meant fewer complaints, fewer messes to clean, and fewer fake smiles from co-workers who only turned on the charm when it suited them. She was behind the counter, refilling the sugar dispensers when the bell above the door chimed. An older black man stepped inside. His clothes were neat, but well-worn, nothing flashy, just a simple button-up and slacks. He carried himself with quiet confidence, but there was something in the way he hesitated for a brief moment, scanning the room before moving forward. Emily recognized that hesitation. She had seen it before, especially in customers who already knew what kind of welcome they were, or weren't, about to receive. And sure enough, the response was immediate. Lisa, leaning against the counter, didn't even glance up from her phone. Kyle, who had been laughing with another server near the soda machine, flicked his eyes toward the door, made the briefest eye contact with the man, then turned right back to his conversation. No greeting, no welcome to Willow Creek Diner, just silence. Emily felt the weight of it, heavy, uncomfortable. This wasn't an accident. Her co-workers had made a choice. For a second, she considered ignoring it. Keeping her head down, it would be easier, it always was. But then she looked at the man again, at the way he stood there, waiting, like he was giving them a chance to prove him wrong just this once. So Emily made a choice too. She wiped her hands on a napkin, grabbed a menu, and walked straight over. "Evening, sir," she said, her tone warm but easygoing. "Just you tonight?" The man met her eyes, and for a brief second, something in his expression softened. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice steady. Emily smiled and motioned toward an open booth by the window. "Right this way. That booth okay for you?" "Perfectly fine," he said as he slid into the seat. She handed him a menu and pulled a pen from behind her ear. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Coffee," he said, black, coming right up. Emily moved quickly, grabbing a fresh pot and pouring the coffee herself. She could feel Lisa's eyes on her, feel Kyle watching too, but she didn't turn around. As she set the cup down in front of the man, he glanced around the diner, then back at her. "You the only one working tonight?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Emily knew exactly what he meant. She flicked her gaze toward the others, where Lisa was now whispering something to Kyle, both of them barely even trying to hide their smirks. "Feels like it sometimes," she said. That made him chuckle. He flipped open the menu, scanning the options. "What's good here?" Emily tilted her head, thinking, "Depends on what you're in the mood for. If you want something hearty, the pot roast is made fresh. But if you want my personal favorite, the grilled salmon's the way to go." He raised an eyebrow. "That's so," she nodded. "Promise you won't regret it." He smiled, small but real. "Salmon it is." Emily jotted it down. "Great choice." As she walked back toward the kitchen, she heard Lisa mutter, just loud enough to be heard, "She's wasting her time." Emily clenched her jaw but kept walking. By the time she placed the order and returned with a fresh coffee refill, she could feel the shift in the air. It was subtle, but it was there, the way Lisa's eyes narrowed, the way Kyle kept glancing toward the booth, like he was waiting for Emily to slip up or say something she shouldn't. Even Tom, the manager, had peeked out from his office, scanning the room before disappearing again. Emily had the sinking feeling that she had just put a target on her back. But she wouldn't realize how bad it was until the next morning. She had barely slept. Something about the way Lisa had muttered under her breath, the way Kyle had smirked, and the way Tom had peeked out from his office left a bad taste in her mouth. But she told herself she was overthinking it. She hadn't done anything wrong. If anything, she had done exactly what a waitress was supposed to do, serve customers. So why did her stomach twist into knots as she pulled into the Willow Creek Diner parking lot the next morning? The air was crisp, the sun barely peeking over the buildings as she grabbed her apron from the passenger seat and slung it over her shoulder. A few cars were already in the lot, including Tom's. Emily stepped inside, expecting the usual Lisa and Kyle standing around gossiping, the kitchen crew prepping for the morning shift, the low hum of the radio playing in the background. But something was off. Lisa wasn't leaning against the counter like she usually did. Kyle wasn't at the coffee station, cracking jokes with the line cooks. Instead, both of them were standing there, watching her. Lisa had a sly little smirk. Kyle had his arms crossed. Neither of them said a word. Emily's grip tightened around her apron. Then, the sound of a door creaking open. Tom. He stood in the doorway of his office, his face unreadable, like he had been waiting for her to walk through that door. "Emily," he said flatly, "come with me." A cold weight settled in her stomach. He didn't elaborate, just turned and disappeared back into his office. Emily swallowed hard. She could still feel Lisa and Kyle watching her as she made her way to the back. She took a slow breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped inside. The office was small, cluttered with paperwork and old coffee stains on the desk. A file sat open in front of Tom, but he wasn't looking at it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, let out a slow breath, and said, "We're letting you go." The words hit like a slap. Emily blinked, her mind scrambling to make sense of what she had just heard. "What?" Tom's expression didn't change. "It's not working out." Emily's heart pounded. "Not working out." She let out a sharp laugh, one completely devoid of humor. "I've been here almost 3 years. I've never missed a shift, never been late." Tom exhaled through his nose, like he was already exhausted by the conversation. "It's a decision we've made." Emily knew exactly what that meant. Her throat tightened. "This is because of last night, isn't it?" Tom didn't confirm it. He didn't have to. His silence said it all. Emily felt heat rise to her face. So I get fired for doing my job. Tom's fingers tapped against the desk. You can collect your final paycheck next week. That was it. No warning, no explanation, just out. Emily clenched her fists, but she knew there was no point in arguing. She untied her apron and set it on the chair. As she turned to leave, she hesitated at the door, forcing herself to look back at Tom. You know this isn't right, she said, her voice steady. Tom didn't even flinch. Emily shook her head and walked out. Lisa was still standing near the counter when she stepped back into the main dining area, a knowing smirk on her face. Kyle was pretending to wipe down a table, but he wasn't even trying to hide the look of satisfaction in his eyes. They had been waiting for this moment. Emily felt her face burn not with embarrassment, but with anger. She wanted to say something, wanted to call them out, make a scene, demand to know how they could be so damn heartless. But she didn't. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She lifted her chin, walked past them without a word, and pushed through the doors into the cold morning air. For the first time in 3 years she had no job, no paycheck, no backup plan. Emily got into her car, slammed the door shut, and gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts. How was she going to pay rent? How was she going to help Ryan with his groceries? How was she? Her phone buzzed. She ignored it at first, staring blankly at the windshield, her thoughts spiraling. Then she glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She hesitated. Then, with a shaking hand, she answered, "Hello." A deep voice came through the line, steady and familiar. "Emily, this is James Holloway." Emily frowned. "I'm sorry, who?" "The man you served last night at Willow Creek Diner." Her breath caught. She sat up a little straighter. "Oh, yes, sir. How can I help you?" There was a pause. Then James said, "I heard what happened." Emily's stomach twisted. Of course he had. News traveled fast in places like Willow Creek. "Yeah, well," she said, forcing out a bitter laugh. "Guess I should have just ignored you like everyone else." James's next words made her freeze. "That's exactly why I'm calling." Because this wasn't the end of Emily's story. It was just the beginning. Emily's grip on the phone tightened. She had no idea why James Holloway, just another customer, or so she thought, was calling her the morning after she had been fired. Her heart pounded as she sat up straighter in the driver's seat. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" There was a pause on the other end. Then James's voice came through, steady and deliberate. "I wasn't just there for dinner last night, Emily," he said. "I was there to see how my employees treat people." Emily blinked. "Your employees? I own Willow Creek Diner," James said simply. For a moment, the words didn't even register. She sat frozen, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and shock. "I'm sorry, what?" she finally managed. "You heard me," he said. Emily pressed her fingers to her temple. "So you're telling me you own this place?" "Yes, and last night you were." "What, checking in?" "More or less," James said. "I make it a habit to visit my restaurants unannounced. No formal inspections, no warning. I come in as just another customer. That's how you learn the truth about how a business is being run." Emily's chest felt tight. "And what did you learn?" she asked. James sighed. "That I have a serious problem with my staff." Emily let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, no kidding." There was another pause. Then James asked, "How long have you worked there?" "Almost 3 years, she said. 3 years. And I've never missed a shift, never been late. I keep my head down, do my job, and treat people like human beings." She exhaled, frustration creeping into her voice. "But apparently that was enough to get me fired." "That's exactly why I'm calling," James said. Emily furrowed her brows. "I don't understand." James was quiet for a moment before he spoke again. "I let them fire you on purpose." Her stomach dropped. "You what?" "I needed to see what they would do," James explained. "I wanted to know if this was just about bad service or if it was something deeper. And now I have my answer." Emily shook her head. So you let them throw me out just to prove a point. I know it wasn't fair, James admitted. But now I know exactly who I can't trust to run my business the way it should be run. Emily felt her pulse thumping in her ears. And what does that mean for me? There was a shift in James's tone, something firm, almost authoritative. It means I need someone I can trust, he said. I need someone who actually understands what it means to run a restaurant fairly, someone who doesn't pick and choose, who gets treated with dignity, based on their own prejudices. Emily frowned. I still don't see what this has to do with me. James's next words stopped her cold. I want you to come back, he said, as the new manager. Emily's breath caught, her brain scrambling to process what she had just heard. You heard me, James said. I fired your manager this morning. Tom's done. Emily's mouth fell open. Lisa and Kyle were going to lose their minds. James continued, I know this is sudden, but I'm not interested in anyone else taking over. You understand what matters in a workplace. You know how people should be treated. That's exactly what Willow Creek Diner needs. Emily swallowed hard. I don't know if I can do this. Yes, you can, James said firmly, and you should. Emily stared out the windshield, her mind spinning. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been tossed aside like she didn't matter. And now she was being offered the very position of the man who had fired her. She took a slow, steady breath. What do you say? James asked. Emily hesitated. She could still hear Lisa's mocking voice, Kyle's smug silence, Tom's dismissive tone. They had counted her out, thought they had gotten rid of her for good. But now she had a chance to be the change they never saw coming. Emily lifted her chin, gripping the phone a little tighter. I'll do it, she said. James let out a satisfied breath. Good. Come in tomorrow morning. You start at 8. Emily nodded, even though he couldn't see her. I'll be there. As she hung up, she sat in stunned silence for a moment, gripping the wheel as the reality of it all sank in. Less than a day ago, she had walked out of Willow Creek Diner with nothing. Tomorrow, she would be walking back in as the boss, and she wasn't coming to play nice. Emily stood outside Willow Creek Diner, gripping the strap of her bag. The morning air was sharp, the kind that cut right through your clothes, but she barely felt it. She had spent all night thinking about this moment. Yesterday, she had walked out of this building with nothing, no job, no explanation, no respect. Today, she was stepping back in with the one thing Lisa, Kyle, and Tom had never imagined she would have. Power. She inhaled deeply, squared her shoulders, and pushed open the door. The scent of fresh coffee and bacon filled the air, just like it always had. Customers were scattered across the booths, forks clinking against plates, the low hum of conversation blending with the radio playing in the background. At first, nobody noticed her. Then Lisa turned from the counter, saw her and froze. Kyle, who had been laughing with a busboy, caught sight of her too, his mouth snapping shut mid-sentence. A flicker of something confusion, unease crossed his face. It was almost perfect. Emily let the moment stretch just long enough for them to squirm before walking toward the counter, setting her bag down with purpose. Lisa recovered first. She scoffed, crossing her arms. What the hell are you doing here? Emily tilted her head. You'll find out soon enough. Lisa's smirk faltered. Before she could say anything else, a door opened at the back of the restaurant. Tom stepped out calm and collected as ever, his hands in the pockets of his tailored coat. He scanned the room, taking his time before his eyes landed on James Holloway. Lisa's face paled. Kyle looked like he wished he could disappear. Tom opened his mouth, then closed it. James stepped beside Emily, his expression unreadable as he turned to face the staff. When he spoke, his voice was steady, measured, but carried the weight of authority. As of this morning, Willow Creek Diner has undergone some management changes, James said. Effective immediately. Tom, your position is terminated. Lisa gasped. Kyle looked like he had been punched in the gut. James's expression remained unreadable. This woman, he gestured toward Emily, was the only employee who treated me with respect. The only one who did her job the way it should be done. He turned back to the staff. his expression hardening. The rest of you, some of you ignored me completely. Some of you made it clear you had no interest in serving certain customers at all. His voice sharpened. That ends today. The silence in the diner was thick. Then James turned back to Emily. Emily is your new manager. Lisa's mouth fell open. Kyle's jaw clenched. A busboy near the drink station widened his eyes. Lisa looked like she wanted to argue, but she wasn't stupid. She still needed a paycheck, and Lisa wasn't about to throw that away. Kyle, on the other hand, wasn't as smart. This is bullsh. James cut him off. You're welcome to quit as well. Kyle froze. His mouth opened, then closed, like he was doing the math in his head. Lisa glared daggers at Emily, but Emily just smiled back. Looks like we all have a lot of adjusting to do, Emily said, her voice light but firm. So let's get to work. She watched as Lisa stormed toward the coffee machine, mumbling under her breath. Kyle grabbed a rag and started wiping down a table with more aggression than necessary. The first few weeks weren't easy. Lisa's usual confidence was replaced with tight-lipped silence. Kyle sulked through every shift, making it painfully obvious that he was only sticking around because he had no better options. A few other servers who had always played along with the old culture of favoritism gritted their teeth and adjusted. Some didn't. A couple of employees quit in the first week. They didn't bother giving notice, just stormed out when it became clear that the way things used to work, the unspoken rules about who deserved good service and who didn't, were gone. But the ones who stayed, the ones who had been following the lead of people like Lisa and Kyle, started watching Emily instead. One night, a busboy, Noah, a college kid who worked nights to pay for school, stopped her as she was wiping down the counter. You really got rid of Tom for that? He asked, voice careful. Emily looked up. For what? For being a jackass to customers, Noah said. Like, I mean, we all knew it happened, but I didn't think anyone actually cared. Emily set the rag down and looked him in the eye. I care. Noah hesitated, then nodded. One evening, James Holloway walked in. Emily was in the middle of balancing invoices when she heard his voice. How's my investment doing? She turned, pushing the paperwork aside, and smirked. I think we're in good shape. James glanced around. The restaurant was busy, not just with customers, but with a different kind of energy than before. The staff moved with purpose. The atmosphere was lighter. The tension that had once lingered in the air now gone. James nodded, satisfied. Told you you'd be fine. Emily leaned against the counter. You were right. She thought back to everything that had happened. She had lost everything, and then gained more than she ever imagined. Because doing the right thing wasn't always easy. Sometimes it cost you everything. But sometimes it gave you more than you ever imagined. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, she said. Because integrity matters, and it starts with how we treat each other.